In a world overrun with the fake, delusional, and disingenuous, he stands as a beacon of truth. He is Abuki Cabal. You are listening to Abuki Cabal.
Welcome to the Abuki Cabal Show.
What's going on, everybody? Excuse me. I think I got my technical difficulties out of the way. I apologize for that, and for any of you guys having problems after your Windows update. Go into your settings and check out your mic settings. Looks like that last update might have knocked you out, or knocked me out anyway. So, today I think I want to tackle this support that you hear so many young black women have. They just blindly throw up these descriptions of how women couldn't work, and they couldn't vote, and they had no power, and they were just subjugated by the men. And these are black women who are basically characterizing the treatment of their mothers and grandmothers, great grandmothers by these men who basically just live to basically, put their foot on their necks and to keep them down. And I know Gigi, it's Green Gorilla, for those of you who aren't subs of his. If you aren't, please go over and sub to his channel. There's a wealth of information over there. Also, Dr. T.S. Johnson, his work is paramount in this regard as well. And I want to kind of throw my hat in here and try to give a little bit of a picture of who Elizabeth Cady Stanton was, the movement, the suffragette movement, and how it pertained to black people. You don't see very much of that out there. You just have this blanket characterization of how women were treated, as if black women and white women were treated the same way. And that's just not the way it was, And I titled this, "You Really Thought They Did It For You, Huh?" Because you'll see they didn't do it for you, and they had no allegiance to you at all. And when it came down to it, they felt like they were more deserving. And this is going to lead up into, Title VII and why sex was thrown into the Civil Rights Bill. It was a last-ditch effort to do what they originally tried to do in the first place, which was to exclude you from the argument entirely. These women felt like they were more deserving of the right to vote than black men and black women. And we'll dig into why they thought that was the case. And when black women tried to contribute, they were, pushed aside and were not to be visible. So much so that the people who were actually fighting, abolitionists who were fighting to free the slaves, wanted nothing to do with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And she was from an abolitionist family. Her mother was an abolitionist, and she had her own views. Let's just say that. But let's kind of look into this and see what you guys think. Oh, and tell me in the comments if you guys want me to re-record the one that I did before this one. about how black mothers and grandmothers destroy their daughters. I'll go ahead and do that too, because that audio was really, really messed up. Unless you've got good speakers and you can turn it up pretty loud, you probably won't be able to hear me, but you can hear the article. So let me know. Let's get in. Alrighty. So here's the article, and this is the History Channel. Yeah, History Channel dug into this, and let's get into it.
How early suffragists left black women out of their fight. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton focused on white women's suffrage over voting rights for all women. Becky Little. Updated. Jan 29, 2021. Original. November 8, 2017. Library of Congress. In the long battle for women's suffrage, and the passage of the 19th Amendment, some leading activists prioritized white women's suffrage over voting rights for all women. Two of the most prominent women suffragists, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, were at one time part of the American Equal Rights Association, AERA, a group they formed with Frederick Douglass and other activists in 1866. The organization's goal was to win voting rights for both women and African Americans, says Lisa Tetro, a history professor at Carnegie Mellon University.
Okay, that's pretty important. And Gigi covered this also, that what most black women fail to acknowledge is that one of the most famous black men of that time, Frederick Douglass, formed the American Equal Rights Association, okay, of which Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were members. But he gets no credit for that. You know, black men supposedly were just there to basically keep black women underfoot. But here you see a black man who was instrumental in trying to help white women in their efforts for suffrage. Okay. 1866. That's important. You know, that's important also, because they also say that women were not able to go to school and all these other things. They couldn't go to college, all these things. Okay. And during that time, late 1800s, women were attending college. You know, if you look, all you got to do is Google it. Google women's graduations from college, 1800s, and it'll show you. It'll show you pictures of them. It'll show you the colleges that they graduated from. It may not have been in large numbers, but you have to realize too that during that time, if you went to colleges because you showed a better handling of academics than the average person. It's not like today where anybody who wants to go to college can go to college. Some people just, today just would have never went to college. Okay. College was a thing that was almost like a meritocracy. You had to basically meet certain standards to get into college, and a lot of these women were brilliant and were able to get into college, just like some men were able to get into college, but there weren't large numbers of men going to college either. So let's move on.
There's tension from the very beginning over the priority of those two demands, she says. Black women fall out of this equation. The Library of Congress. During the era's founding convention, black suffragist Frances Ellen Watkins Harper addressed how this framing was unhelpful for her and other black women. Harriet Tubman, whose courage and bravery won a recognition from our army and from every black man in the land, is excluded from every thoroughfare of travel, Harper said. Talk of giving women the ballot box? Go on. After only 3 years, the era dissolved over heated fights about whether to support the 15th Amendment, with which black men won the right to vote. In the South, this victory would be short-lived. At a pivotal convention in May 1869, Douglas argued that the era should support the amendment while continuing to fight for women's suffrage. Stanton not only disagreed, she gave an address filled with racist stereotypes about the male immigrants and formerly enslaved men whom the amendment would enfranchise. Think of Patrick and Son.
Okay. Now, you hear that? These women that Frederick Douglass advocated for basically did. She went out and she basically disagreed with him and you know, put those black men down by using racial epithets. You know, and what she's going to say after that is that basically think of these uneducated, you know, ape-like men, you know, basically going out and giving the right to vote over a woman like me. And I'm putting that in my own words, but that's pretty much close to what she said. But they'll go over with exactly what she said. So I'm gonna go ahead and let you hear that. Oh, well, let me cover this first. Where you see up here, you know, where Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, you know, basically talked about the contributions of black women who Elizabeth Cady Stanton basically pushed off to the side as if they were inconsequential. These women did more than a lot of white women did during that time who were hailed as heroes. A lot more, you know, and who had gained respect of men. As you can see, Harriet Tubman, whose bravery won recognition from our army, an army of white people, and from every black man in the land. Black women had our respect. So did Miss Harper. She had our respect also. And she knew enough to say, talk about giving women the ballot box. Go on. You know? So see, I mean, she was unimpressed, you know, with the ballot box. If you can go out there and vote, but you can't even get to the ballot box. That was her issue. And these white women were not sympathetic to their ability or lack thereof to traverse the country or territory in order to go and do everyday things that people should not have had to even worry about doing. You know, they weren't thinking about luxury or any of these things that these women are talking about today. They were thinking about the necessity of being able to go back and forth to shop, you know, for food, to go and to buy things that they needed, clothes, whatever the case may be, because any one of those things, you could die every day if you ran into the wrong people, just being black. So during that time also, black women were working and so were black men. You know, what people don't realize is that black men and black women were both slaves during that time. Both slaves. OK, so how could a black man who was a slave be over a black woman who didn't belong to him? They both belonged to the master of the plantation and his wife and his children. His children could tell you to do something. If you didn't do it, you'd get whipped within an inch of your life, if not killed. And it was just like if the master was talking to you. Same thing with the wife. Okay. But you have women today that act like, you know, black men were responsible for that subjugation. And you'll see in here, well, I'm not gonna jump the gun. I'm just gonna go ahead and move on from there. Here we go.
And Hansen Young Tung, who do not know the difference between a monarchy and a republic, who cannot read the Declaration of Independence or Webster's spelling book, making laws for Susan B. Anthony, she said at the convention. The amendment creates an antagonism everywhere between educated, refined women and the lower orders of men, especially in the South. Both. Okay.
Now you see this section is very important. She said, think of Patrick and Sambo and Hans and Young Tung, who do not know the difference between a monarchy and a republic, who cannot read the Declaration of Independence or Webster's spelling book, making laws for Susan B. Anthony, she said at a convention. Okay, so basically what she's saying is basically these dumb men, trying to make rules for a white woman like me. That's what she said. And she said this in public in a convention against the amendment that gave black men the right to vote. She went on further to say the amendment creates an antagonism everywhere between the educated, refined women and the lower orders of men. So what she's saying is that we, even though these people are men, we are above them because we're white and we're educated. Okay. And she felt like by giving us the right to vote, black men, that we would somehow be placed over white women too. So she thought the order would be white men, black men, white women, black women, and children. Okay. So that's what she thought the order was going to be, or that's what she couldn't have thought that that's what the order was going to be, but that's the way she portrayed the order to be to these women, to basically scare them into believing that they would be subjugated, to the whims of these lower orders of men, as she put it. And you have women out here, college women today, going out and spewing this stuff out to us black men, as if there's some historical precedent of us subjugating women, and then they even protect white women against us as if we are the brutes that history has painted us as. It's so bad that we're starting to hear some of the same racist rhetoric that was used to prevent black men from voting, to prevent black men from getting educations, to prevent black men from getting jobs. We're starting to hear some of that same stuff, that same rhetoric being spouted off by black women here on YouTube, pretty much all over the place. Even with the voting that's going on right now. These women are telling us that basically you don't know any better. You should just listen to us and just vote for who we want you to vote for. And, you'll be better off just listening to us. So we were freed from slavery, fought for the right to vote. The Civil Rights Bill is passed. We isolate the problems that keep us from prospering still with the Moynihan Report. The Kerner Commission substantiates the claims of the Moynihan Report even further. All of the information points towards giving support to black men so that they can hold their families together, so that they can build strong communities and prosper, so that even if, reparations were not given, we could still build our own foundations and prosper. And it also said that if you keep racism at bay, Southern spawned racism away, that we would prosper if all those things were done. But what's been done? We've sent more and more and more help to women. First to white women with Title VII. So they took most of the benefits of Title VII that were supposed to go to black people, not black men and black women. Not black men, but to black people. And they've taken that and they're still teaching these black women and girls that your problem is the black man. It's not them. It's not the lack of support that we've had. It's them. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you help. We're going to get you education, and we're going to do all of these things. And while we're doing that, we're going to tell you even more about how these black men have kept you down, and how you should always try to strive to get an education as opposed to having a family, having a husband. Oh, and by the way, you don't really have to have a husband. You don't even have to be heterosexual. You can be by yourself and you can just be happy. You don't have to follow any rules. Being with a man, that's just like slavery. It's just like what Cady Stanton characterized as. She tried to actually say that white women's efforts to obtain the right to vote and the way that they were treated during that time was the same as slaves, as slavery was with black people. It was the exact same experience. That's what she said. And you have people out here bringing up her name as if she is to be revered in some way. To this day. Black woman now. But let's move on. I'm long stroking.
Douglas and Stanton had previously attended the Seneca Falls Convention for Women's Rights in 1848. According to Tetreault, what's particularly painful was that Douglas had been the one at Seneca Falls who stood up and defended women's right to vote. And then when it comes to the 15th Amendment, Stanton refuses to reciprocate. The disagreements at that convention led not only to the dissolution of ERA, but a split in the women's suffrage movement between those who supported the 15th Amendment and those who did not. Stanton and Anthony joined the faction that did not. And after the amendment passed, many of the suffragists on that side pandered to white Southerners by arguing that if white women could vote, they could drown out the black male vote.
There you go. So you see who she put her hat in with. White Southerners. And she argued that if white women could vote, they could drown out the black male vote. Something that they're still trying to do to this day. Okay? You see that there are efforts to basically eradicate the black male voice in the political era. I mean, we see this in the Democratic Party. I mean, because look, the Democrats, the people who control the narrative in the Democratic Party are white people. People in the Republican Party who control the narrative are white people. The only difference between the two is that Republicans do not care about trying to placate or to try to get you to think that they're on your side. They'll throw you a few nuggets, but by and large, if you can't see that they're not doing anything for you, you're crazy. But people want change so badly that we're getting to the point where now we'll follow the Klan. If the Klan is telling us that they'll do something for us, we'll follow. You're seeing a lot of moves by black folks nowadays that just don't make any sense. You even see the people who basically don't even want to move en masse and basically hold people accountable for not producing anything of substance to us. You have black women who basically, as long as they throw them bones and give them something individually, which they see themselves as separate from the black community, what are you going to do for black women? That's what you hear. You don't hear them saying, what are you going to do for the black community? But you hear on the other side, you hear black men saying, what are you going to do for the black community? We also say, what are you going to do for black men? But if you do for black men are the protectors. We are the ones who do things for our families. We're not out here just doing things to be alone. They're not. I mean, I don't see groups of men out here saying basically, we are not, we don't want to have anything to do with women. And well, there is now, SYSBM, but they're come on, they're still dealing with women. You know, they're still dealing with women, and they'll eventually get into relationships too. You know, but once they get into relationships, what are they going to do? They're going to take care of that woman. They're going to create a household. They're going to live out their lives. Hopefully have kids, treat them, train them up right, and then, contribute to society. But be mindful of who you lay down with. You know what I mean? And I mean this politically, We can't do what we've done in the past. We have to learn from what we did in the past, and we have to hold these people accountable. When we go and we say what we want, we need to say what we want en masse. You can't just say what you want and don't show up. And you can't go to people who are not going to give you anything and go and vote for them in order to make the other side produce something for you. It just doesn't work that way. I think we need to learn how to negotiate better. We need to learn how give and take things are when it comes down to doing things. That's why when you send ambassadors over to different countries, they have to find out things how we can make moves to get what we want, but also give them a little bit of what they want. That's how you get things done. That's why our system isn't working now, because one side wants total victory without actually having to work with the other side. So we've had stalemate for years. But let's move on. I digress.
Anthony also sought to distance her work from Douglas, who continued to support women's suffrage for the rest of his life. During an 1890s suffrage meeting in Atlanta, she asked him not to appear on stage with white women because it would seem inappropriate. However, these racist strategies ultimately proved ineffective because Southern white men were already preventing black men from voting with discriminatory poll taxes, tests, and lynching. Both Anthony and Stanton died more than a decade before the 19th Amendment passed. And although their work was instrumental in making that passage possible, they did not work to prioritize making voting rights accessible to all women. In 1920, black women in the South and many Latinas in the Southwest were still barred from voting because of racist voting restrictions. And when they tried to reach out to the main suffrage organizations at the time, they were ignored. They say basically, "Help us, we still can't vote," Tetro explains. And those organizations basically say, "That's a race question, it doesn't concern us."
There you go. That's a race question, doesn't concern us, okay? And the very women that everybody teaches you about in high school and junior high school and college, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they tell you, oh, they did so much for all women, where it clearly states, with quotes out of their own mouths, that they had nothing but contempt for black men. Frances Ellen Watkins is probably somebody you should be probably, Harper, is somebody you should probably be looking and learning about, because she was the one who was right. It doesn't matter, if you guys are sitting up fighting for the right to vote, if I can't even get to the poll without getting killed. Okay. Now, after you've seen this, I want you to go back and I want you to think about this here, this right now, today. You got in Georgia, you have a governor who basically tried to do the very same thing. If you give somebody water at the polls or waiting in line at the polls, you can be arrested. If you give them food, you can be arrested. Let's shut down places for people to vote. All right. So you have some of the same efforts by these Southern whites to try to keep black folks from voting even to this day. But guess what? There's some of us that say we should support these people. You got people, in the Supreme Court who basically are black, but don't represent black people. Okay. But I digress, but you know where I'm going with this, and, do your homework. That's all I can say. It's okay to be conservative. It's just not okay to be the kind of conservative that supports, people who don't like for you to vote because of the color of your skin, or because out of fear of you gaining some kind of political power over them, because that's the bottom line. And nowadays, people, we don't really know what they're thinking. They make up all kinds of excuses as to why, that may not be the case, or why, we may be jumping the gun as far as, us thinking that that's what they're thinking. No. Mm-mm. So here we go. Let's move on to another one. And I'm going to provide these links in the description. This is Georgetown University. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her views of race as evidence in her own writings. Let's listen to this one.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her views of race as evidenced in her writings. Summary. From an early age, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was deeply affected by the inequality between men and women. When she married Henry B. Stanton, an abolitionist, she attended the World's Anti-Slavery Convention, where, rather than feeling inspired by the anti-slavery movement, Stanton was horrified by the exclusion of women from the proceedings. She was surprised that abolitionists recognized the injustice of slavery, but didn't see the injustice of a society that put women in a similar position. With Lucretia Mott, another attendee, Stanton resolved to organize a society that would advocate for women's rights. In supporting the movement for women's suffrage, Stanton occasionally used racist tactics and language. This paper examines the source of Stanton's racism, the role it played in her struggle to obtain women's suffrage, and the effect these beliefs had on the suffrage movement. In her early speeches and letters advocating women's suffrage, Stanton would sometimes relate the position of slaves to that of women. At times the comparison was unfavorable, attempting to show that women were more deserving of enfranchisement. At other times she presented women and slaves in equal positions, equally deserving of a political voice. When the Civil War began, Stanton suspended her campaign for women's suffrage and gave her support to the emancipation of the slaves. Even after the 13th Amendment freed the slaves, many believed that slaves would not truly be freed until they were politically enfranchised. Thus began the movement for an amendment that would establish their legal status. Stanton believed that by aligning the women's cause with this movement, women's suffrage could be achieved sooner. The abolitionists and Republicans wished to keep the two movements separate, however, believing that combining them would hinder the enfranchisement for the free slaves. Stanton opposed ratification of the 14th Amendment if it only applied to men, causing the abolitionist movement to reject her. Persevering in support of extending enfranchisement to include women, Stanton made several claims: that no class of citizens should be underprivileged, that black men would be as hesitant as white men to extend the vote to women, that women who were educated and white were more deserving of the vote than former slaves, that women would better ensure the nation's safety, and that women needed to protect themselves from the brutality of black men. Stanton's racist positions may have resulted from the abolitionists' betrayal and abandonment of Stanton's cause. Because the abolitionists would not help her pursue women's suffrage, Stanton found it necessary to compete with them by denigrating black men and asserting that white women were more worthy of suffrage. Unfortunately for Stanton, these tactics did not convince the abolitionists that the women's cause was justified at that time. Instead, it distanced her further from those who might have supported her. She might have had a better chance of obtaining suffrage for women if she had used language that was less antagonistic. Creator: Das Neves, Maria M. Bibliographic citation. Das Neves, Maria M. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her views of race as evidenced in her writings, 1992.
Okay. You see, she said that black men, the reason why she didn't want to support black men's right to vote is that she believed that black men would be as hesitant as white men to extend the vote to women. She had no evidence of that, because one of the most notable black men of their time stood in solidarity with her. He actually spoke out for her first, but she didn't reciprocate, as evidenced by the last article that I placed up, that we went through. Okay? So she had no evidence of this. She was just a bitter old lady that basically wanted rights for women, white women, as opposed to those of black men. She would make up anything that she had to say in order to basically further her cause, without, necessarily giving any help or aid to the black cause. Okay. She also felt that women who were educated and white were more deserving of the vote than former slaves. Okay. But these slaves had been through a lot more than she had. And their day-to-day mistreatment was far worse than anything that any woman during that time had suffered. They were just trying to get the right to vote. But these people were trying to get the right to not be killed, to vote, to actually enjoy what other free people during that time enjoyed. Okay? But she didn't respect that. She felt like women had it worse. And we hear that to this day. Women have it worse than anybody. We're doubly oppressed. This is the origins of that. Okay. She also believed that women would better ensure the nation's safety and that women needed to protect themselves from the brutality of black men. Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound eerily similar to what some of these other YouTubers are saying? These female YouTubers and even the atmosphere of what's going on some of these news agencies, where you don't see them speaking to any black male pundits on the air. They're all black women, or they're gay folks. The black male voice has been silenced. It has been effectively silenced outside of YouTube. You got TikTok, you got, Instagram. But where else do you see the black male voice that's advocating for the black family being heard? You don't hear it on Fox Soul. They don't even want to tell you who you're talking to. You have this woman saying that, we white women would protect the nation's safety better than these black men who basically fought in the Civil War to try to obtain their freedom and to preserve the Union. That's a bold statement, don't you think? And what's even crazier is that you have people today, you have modern women who throw these names around. Talk about first wave feminism as if it was just, it embraced everybody. When we know it didn't. And the best part of all is she thought that all women, needed to protect themselves from the brutality of the black men. A brutality that didn't even exist. Black men were not brutalizing anybody. Black men were being brutalized. We know this to be the case because there's all kinds of historical record to present the argument that is not what was taking place during that time. Black women were being hung too, lynched, sexually abused, all forms of murder. All of that was taking place. If you don't believe me, even after a high school education and all the internet out here, your ability to be able to Google and see the horrors that black men had to endure as well as black women, as well as black children. And you have this woman that basically said that her cause was, the things that white women had to suffer were just as bad as anything that black people went through, especially black men, black women too, because she silenced them as well. She was so bad that the abolitionists during the time basically cast her out because of what she was doing. So she sided with the beast, the Southern, slavers and people who wanted to basically keep black people in bondage and continue to basically mercilessly, savage black people. That's who she sided with. And she did all of this when she came from a family. Her husband was an abolitionist. Her mother was an abolitionist. I think it said her father was too. Okay. So she was just antagonistic just for the sake of being antagonistic. But you don't have to believe me. Here it is. This is Georgetown University. Whole paper was written about it. I'll put it down here. They'll give you all the information if you want to find it and you want to dig through it. But I think it's pretty much said enough. So I got one more here. And this one is where he said, for Stanton, all women were not created equal. And this will be the last one, you guys. Oop.
For Stanton, all women were not created equal. Much of America as we know it evolved in the 19th century. As we'll explore in a series of 3 conversations this week with writers who seek out new ways to understand old events. In 1979, 19th century activist Susan B. Anthony became the first woman to appear on a circulating United States coin. Anthony is remembered for her work in fighting for women's right to vote. But it was her friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton who actually launched the women's rights movement. She, however, never got a coin. If she wanted a career where she ended up on a coin and would be remembered for accomplishing a particular goal, then, yes, we can say she sabotaged herself, historian Laurie Ginsburg tells NPR's Steve Inskeep. Ginsburg, the author of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, An American Life, says that although Stanton is well known for her involvement in the women's rights movement, she often got in the way of that cause by prioritizing the concerns of middle-class, white women over others. Ginsburg says that prioritization has had lasting effects on the way we think about feminism and identity politics today. Interview highlights. On the women Elizabeth Cady Stanton really fought for. She certainly claimed that she fought for the rights of all women. She fought to end the barriers that denied America's citizens their rights purely on the basis of sex, and she demanded rights that not one of us would be willing to give up. She demanded, in the true liberal tradition, access to the mainstream of American society in terms of professions, education, law, politics, property and so on. But when she said women, I think that she primarily had in mind women much like herself. White, middle class, culturally if not religiously Protestant, propertied, well-educated. And my disagreement with Stanton is that she came to see women like herself as more deserving of rights than other people. On the post-Civil War fight over the 15th Amendment. In the post-Civil War period, when there was a battle among abolitionists, of which Stanton counted herself, between having a 15th Amendment that gave black men the vote or holding out for a suffrage amendment that granted the vote to all adult Americans, Stanton and her friend Susan B. Anthony stood on what they claimed was the highest moral ground by demanding universal human rights for all and, historians have argued about this ever since, not being willing to sacrifice women's rights for the politically expedient challenge of gaining rights for black men. African American men were, eventually, granted the rights of citizens, and African American women, of course, weren't. On losing the moral high ground in the fight for universal human rights. Stanton didn't just stand on the moral high ground. She also descended to some rather ugly racist rhetoric along the lines of, "We educated, virtuous white women are more worthy of the vote." She talked about how much worse black men would be as voters than the white women about whom she was concerned, and she was really quite dismissive of black women's claims. There were some comments about, what will we and our daughters suffer if these degraded black men are allowed to have the rights that would make them even worse than our Saxon fathers? She has one, I think, inexplicable comment about black women finding an even worse slavery under black men than they did under their former white slave owners. That's why when people talk about Stanton and women's rights and her devotion to women, my first question is always, which women? What are the issues here? Which women are we talking about? Whose concerns are going to take priority? And then, along the way, and this is where my disagreement with Stanton is strongest, whose rights are you going to put down in the process of demanding your own? For Stanton.
Now, that's very important. And that's what I think, that's what black men are saying now. Whose rights are you going to put down in the process of demanding your own? That's what we're saying. Black women are demanding all of these rights and all of this extra privilege. And in the midst of doing that, they're putting down black men. But when we say that, we become the face of evil. And it's not right. It's not right. And what's worse about it is that here you have a black woman who basically is saying that very same thing, that when she's talking about these contributions that Stanton made, she has to say, which woman are you talking about? She has to highlight these things because people just use these blanket terms. And she basically acknowledges that it is a problem, and it's still a problem now when talking about women's rights, because we're starting to see that it's the same rhetoric. We have to protect ourselves from these black men. She even used it against black women. What will we and our daughters suffer if these degraded black men are allowed to have the rights that would make them even worse than our Saxon fathers? There's no evidence that we were worse to them or that we would be worse to them. She just conjured up a belief. And we all know that all a white woman had to do during that time was to scream. All she had to do was to say that we did something to her. And whole communities were burnt to the ground. Men were dismembered. All manner of atrocities and horrors befell black people just from the verbalization of a fictional event from a white woman. There was no need to have any evidence or any of that. And we see that today. And believe all women. Now any woman, black woman or white woman, can say that you did something and it's over for you. It's over for you. They don't have to have any evidence. Matter of fact, they'll fabricate the evidence. They'll produce it after the fact. After they got you in jail and they've given you 30, 40 years, they'll produce some evidence after the fact. That's what we see now. We see a whole movement that's just been brought to bear on all men to instill fear in them. Don't cross us, Don't even think about it. And you see, the LGBT community are basically using it too. If you don't necessarily agree with what they're doing, they can say, hey, they can use those women's, allegations and weapons against us with the same lethality as the women did, without a scrap of evidence. Okay, so we're starting to see an all-encompassing, movement to basically put down people who have never done anything against them. And now there's a history of us, being these brutish people who basically subjugated these women, and there's no historical evidence to support it. And it all came from this woman's mouth. And we still hear it to this day. So let's move on, finish this up.
All women were not created equal. Much of America as we know it evolved in the 19th century. As we'll explore in a series of 3 conversations this week with writers who seek out new ways to understand old events. In 1979, 19th century activist Susan B. Anthony became the first woman to appear on a circulating United States coin.
Oh.
Anthony is remembered for her work in fighting for women's right to vote. But it was her friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton who actually launched the women's rights movement. She, however, never got a coin. If she wanted a career where she ended up on a coin and would be remembered for accomplishing a particular goal, then, yes, we can say she sabotaged herself, historian Lori Ginsburg tells NPR's Steve.
Okay, it started over. But I'll just go ahead and I'll finish it up here. So what the lady, the woman said was basically, whose rights are you going to put down in the process of demanding your own? Okay. So in the next session of this, it says on the dangers of declaring the women's rights issue an age. She says, I think that there are modern implications to this. I mean, I think that Stanton helped create the rhetoric or a political ideology where when we say women, and often when the media says women, in terms of feminist goals, we think middle-class white women, okay? You guys keep that in mind, because they say women and then they put our faces on, they put black women's faces on it, and they say women of color, but who they're really talking about is white women, because those are the women who are going to get the benefits. But we have all these black women going out there and getting it. You're shown, you look at these, you look at the covers, you look at the movies, you look at what's put out in front of you, and it's always got the same packaging. It's going by the banner of inclusion now. And I made a mistake earlier of saying that Lori Ginsburg was black. She's not. Okay. So I misspoke. Here's a picture of her here. She goes on to say, it's never been the case that the contemporary women's movement was all white or middle class. This kind of arrogance in assuming that you can declare which are the women's rights issues of an age has always struck me as an ongoing problem. Okay, she says the obvious analogy that's been raised to me many times when I've spoken about this book is the one between the 2008 presidential primary when Clinton and Obama were running against each other. And there were a lot of people saying, who should be president first, a woman or an African American? That's where I say it's a false dichotomy to continue to describe women's rights as represented by this white woman. I'm not saying that Clinton did that, but the media often did that. The black civil rights as represented by a black man, there's a more complicated way to talk about that. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I mean, I can kind of agree with that. And I agree with her assessment that what was talked about or the way it was packaged during that time is correct. And there was a race to see who was going to gain the presidency first, a white woman or a black man. And there was a lot of people who felt like that black man deserved it a lot more than that white woman. Okay. So, yeah, that's a lot to kind of digest, but I hope I laid it out in a way that was easily digestible. So, you guys tell me what you think in the comments, and we will continue our journey on this path of trying to understand why we keep having to deal with the same old. This thought process that we black men are the problem. When we've been pretty much brutalized by the system that's working as intended to basically keep us in our place, keep us powerless, keep us politically ignorant, and to stifle our progress. And by offering goodies to black women, they have historically shown that basically if they have goodies, they say to themselves, why do I need a man? Why do I need a man? Why should I be even interested or even entertain a man leading? And as we heard from, the man boy, Hope Giselle, she's spouting off the same claims as the feminist movement. Black men, in her words, don't have the knowledge or the wherewithal to lead. Okay, so we have to prove that we're good enough to lead black women, white women, white men, white teachers, white military, the white world. We have to go up against that. And we're still not respected. And the thing about it is that we've still prospered enormously through this adversity. Not as much as we probably should have, but we still prospered. So you guys tell me what you think. This is it's enlightening, but it's also depressing to go down this road and to see where some of these these talking points come from, the historical footprints that lead up to today, that these young folks don't even know where this stuff come from. You're hearing people who are, you're hearing 6-year-olds say that black men ain't shit. You're hearing, teenagers. You're having women who are in their 20s talking to older black men as if they're of no consequence. So just know where it comes from. Just doesn't just come out of thin air. It comes from this. And it comes from, movies like The Color Purple and all these other movies where they show us as the demons to be feared in the dark. It's us. Some black man hunkered down waiting to get them. It's a shame. I appreciate you guys listening. I appreciate all the support you guys have given me. I'm going to try to shout out the names of my contributors, Cash App and whatnot. I really appreciate you guys. And thanks for holding out until I got my technical difficulties out of the way. I appreciate you guys, man. Check you out next time.
I feel like a motherless child alone.